Okay. Right, Maui, what is your good point?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you let me know that we got Ross as the guest, I figured we should just make sure we talk about Fnatic and especially blameF, because blameF was just unbelievable in the RMRs, and I think we've talked about before. I mean, you and I rate blameF pretty highly compared to how the community sentiment has sort of just created a really bad image of who blameF is as a person. Yes, blameF is a player that is more prone to getting eco frags. Yes, he's more prone to saving in a situation than maybe some other riflers. But I don't actually I like I think it was Pimp at IEM Rio who said that the best Danish player in the world is Tessus, or I mean, the best Danish player. You don't have to add the in the world part, I suppose, but it's the best Danish player is Tessus. I I can't see how it's not blameF, actually. I actually cannot see how it's not blameF. Seeing how blameF played at the RMR, and like no flame to really the rest of Fnatic, but what he did to lift them up in map 3 against Eklot, like it should have never, if there were, I'll just put it like this. If all of the players on Fnatic were, say, 90% as good as Fnatic instead of having the wavering form that they tend to have throughout these kinds of events, Fnatic is like a top 18 team in the world, maybe top 15 team in the world. Like he was so far and away the best player that and also on top of that, in the final map of a BO3, all the pressure's on the line. He got 12 opening duel wins, zero losses. That is crazy. And if I was kind of keeping track during the actual match, and I think 8 of them were regulation, and then 4 of them were overtime, if I'm not mistaken. So it was like 4 of his 8 or 4 of his 12, I mean, were in the highest pressure moment of him and his basically his career at that point. He's only been to one major before, and for him to qualify now with this team, like it was just simply absurd. He ends up the entire event as the third highest rated person at the RMR. And if you look at the people he's next to, it's like Zywoo, Torzi, Bit, Heavy God's there too, Yimpat. Like they're mostly teams that got through a little bit cleaner, with the exception of Heavy God. And so for him to put up those kinds of numbers, and also just not be like, the bait F moniker has just ran way too far, because the way he played in this game, the amount of times he's just pressuring door early on in the round, the amount of fights he's taking on early, like looking for fights, like he knows he wants to get an opening kill for his team. It's not just like it's not baiting in the same way that so many people in the community imagine him to be. Like the blame F that is actually playing the game versus the bait F that Twitch chatters and Redditors imagine are such a different actual product. So I'm personally really glad to see him make it. And I mean, I kind of was going to expand this a little bit to Fnatic in general as a team, but really, I think the big highlight of your team is Blame F, and I'd say that the fact that you guys were able to just swoop him up at the time you did, when his stock was probably at an all-time low, and for then him to prove in front of everybody that he was able to qualify with a Fnatic that, I mean, come on, if you look at the rosters 1-to-1, the Astralis lineup, even without Device, versus the Fnatic lineup with Blame F, I would say that the surrounding pieces to that Astralis lineup are better than what Fnatic has, and yet you guys still made it. So the star power obviously had a huge factor there. And again, I mean, you could just take the whole point as just being blame F is my good point, period.
Yeah, like Ben is one of the most impressive people I've ever met in esports. I think he's more of the older ilk of sports people, and what my generation probably people liked from athletes, and being very receptive of or just driving standards and how players drive those standards. And that is, I find, in some way at times alien in esports, that it's kind of the expectation is that a lot of it is coming from the coaching staff, the team director, the player management, and it isn't so much players holding one another accountable. I think he's like such a consummate professional, the way he conducts himself, the way he does his own preparation.
He's one of the people who always has his hours up, right?
Yeah, like everything. Like it's regimented, it's routine, it's the face, it's the match prep, it's the gym, it's the diet, it's the input in post game, pre game. There are things that he did at the Ormore in terms of the preparation for us on certain maps that were like completely like game changing for us. So you can see how he's always kind of ended up in that in-game leadership role, because historically in-game leaders were always just the person who put in the most effort outside of the game and brought a lot of it. That is shifting over time, but we were. It's just one of those things. It just happens in sports. Like players that are undervalued by the market because of perception. I think that there's a few of them in Counter-Strike where people underrate the value that they actually offer. And Ben was just in that moment in his career where its kind of complexity was, a very high, the expensive team to put together and probably, one trophy in that period. And then his time at Astralis was tumultuous, to say the least. So it's like his stock was low, and also his role wasn't really sought after, I think, at the time from other teams. There was capable people. It's also uber desirable role to have in most teams, but a lot of the time that person doesn't give as much input in terms of the whole picture of Counter-Strike. They're kind of just someone in the periphery, but his style of play, he's, as to Maui's point, he's taken way more responsibility in winning us key rounds, going and getting entries. But he also has a lot of space and a lot of trust in the other players, and that's the huge part of it. There has to be a willingness. If he comes with ideas that people are accepting, and there's no pushback at all. So if he comes and wants to do something and has an idea, that someone will, more Freddie or Tim or Alex, Body or Maddie, those guys, they will just help create the space for him to do those things. So they see his value. So we're very lucky to have him, and I was so relieved for him that we qualified, but also so relieved for the other players. We built up so much scar tissue within just in that group of players. Bar Knock, who's qualified, for multiple majors in a row, and Freddie in Crims, to him all this stuff is just like water off a duck's back. He's ice cold throughout these games. But for the other guys, Maddie was at Bucharest with us and failed to qualify for the major, and it was an awful moment. And so was Body, and Body hadn't been to a major in forever. So for him, it was like trying to get back to the peak. And then Blame has been to one major prior to this ever, which is crazy considering how sick of a player he is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just so happy for those guys. And it's tough because you set like the whole goal is like, we need to qualify for the majors. Like everything is building towards this one-off event, and then you have some things fell in line for us in terms of best of, like we played Rebels and we played who's the other team we played the best one? Beppu, who in fairness that was a decent result, beating them at Nuke. But then we played Navi. We played teams that we're expected to lose to. We played teams we were expected to beat. And we beat them, and we didn't have to play the decider game. And that was a huge thing. So things fell our way as well. But yeah, it was the relief. I can't in the room, the relief when we were together. So I think Ben has been transformative for us, but it's also a case of that he's setting standards, and he has a standard that he wants to have at a team, and like everyone needs to contribute to that and rise to that. And it's so nice to have players that do that stuff, that come in, and that I can see how that might not be palatable for other players, might not be palatable in certain team environments, or if you're coming in as an outsider and then trying to do that where you don't have full buy-in or the respect of the players, like that can be super tough. But here he has it in abundance, and the guys love playing with him. So yeah.
I appreciate the way he made Crims there sound like fucking Dr. Manhattan from the comic book Watchmen, where it's like, it's 2013, I am with LGB, I'm early in my career, now I am playing NIP. It's 2015, I am winning in the Fnatic era, Flusher may have cheated, I don't care anyway, lol. It's 2018, now me and Brawlan here. Like, he's just fucking experiencing all of time through just like, he made it sound like he was some like higher life form. Like, these years are but days to blameF in like some fucking elf character. I love it. In many ways, though, he does live up to that. That is like the fucking guy I see him as. He is just super chill, isn't he? So, okay. Go on.
No, he's still like making jokes and those.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
The relief that get, like he eases the.
Oh, even he had like tension from that, right?
Oh, for sure, man.
Right,
yeah, for sure. But he's gotten that stage in his career where he wants it more for the other players than he does for himself, kind of thing. So it's okay. But for Freddie, it's like you always want him to be more vocal and more of a leadership role, but it's taken time, but he's gotten to that where it's with younger players. He can see and even for Body and Blame, it's like those moments trying to qualify that he becomes more and more vocal in those games, where in the past he was like kind of just a silent person who goes about his work really effectively, never misses utility, just really reliable. Now he knows that he needs to contribute in a more meaningful way.
Yes, as the old joke on this show goes, it was never actually true that Broline didn't want to speak English. He just didn't want to speak to a specific English person. Same with Crims. So you know what? Problem solved now. He can speak English as long as it's not to a dickhead all day long, it turns out. Works brilliant, actually, as long as you enjoy the language. So, okay, back on blameF, though. Let's get back to the Glaze F fucking session. So I will say, first of all, obviously this is one of those aforementioned stories from Ross's good point, isn't it? Because if you think about it, where was blameF at the previous RMR? The contrast is ridiculous, isn't it? Like, you basically have a night and day example. Before he was on a so-called super team, by the way, people are going to do that thing forever where they go, was it a super team? Super teams are a terminology based on when you form the squad. How did people perceive the players? It's not about whether it actually succeeded or a promise that it will. So that was on paper, because it was like all those HLTV top 20 players all in one team. That was a super team, and also it cost millions of dollars, etc. And lastly, I mean, obviously people highlighted that this tournament where Astralis didn't make it, but the difference was previous RMRs, Astralis did always send rosters that on paper should at least have had like a good chance to make it and hadn't. So it was very conspicuous they hadn't made it. So if you think about where he was at, essentially when he got kicked out of that team, the stock couldn't be any lower. Like, I mean, I genuinely want people to think about this. What if Fnatic wasn't the team that saw like the value in this guy and picked him up? Where the fuck would he be playing right now? Would he be like Hooksy? Would he just be sat doing nothing? Because I think, by the way, he doesn't seem like the sort of guy who'd like to do that, just sit on the sidelines and get forgotten about. If he played, he'd have to be on an even worse team. So I don't even know what team he would be on right now. And I think that is an absolute travesty, because not only, as you've seen here, where he was like essentially arguably the best player in the fucking RMR, especially by the way, had the most on his shoulders, like Maui's saying, like, difference is people like Zimu who have vitality. blameF had players where not all of them did that great all times. It was more up and down for the rest of the squad. So I thought he was awesome at this tournament. I think in general, as soon as he arrived at Fnatic, he just looked better and better and better every single month I've seen him play, even as the lineup's been sort of tweaked. And then also, I put this out there before, one of the reasons I thought it was so dirty the way that Fnatic did him, Astralis, is when he was kicked out, the implication people had was, well, who needs blameF anyway? We have Stown. It's like, I'm going to go the other way. It's the other way around, dickheads. Like, blameF is better than Stown. What are we even talking about right now? You're just saying that, guys, because you remember when Heroic was really good, he was like the player that got to look the best in the team. I'm just going to put this out there. You know, when people even say blameF was a top 20 player all those years, yeah, by the way, if you ever go and look where he is on the top 20, the only reason he isn't in the top 10, by the way, is because his teams usually work good enough. And by the way, he's nearly always the reason that he is even in the top 20, if you know what I mean. Like, he has to take like Astralis lineups that are just like, all right, you know, it's like you've built like 3/5 of a good team, and then the other two, you know, no one knows yet, / they never make it. And then he has to like hard carry like this, get them into like a playoffs of a tournament. Then he can just sneak into the top 20 because he has enough like EVPs or whatever the fuck HLTV go on. Like, what I'm saying here is, guys, like, if you reverse their careers and he's on some fucking sick functional team like Heroic, where they build the whole team around him and he just gets to do like secondary, I imagine he'd have a fucking bunch more top 10 placings. Like, he's actually a fabulous player. Like, I agree with you, Maui. You could easily make the case he's the best Danish player, or was in any of these years. Like, even if it was someone else, he's like number 2 or number 3. Like, because the thing I want to emphasize with this guy is, my issue always was, is he IGL material? Because like, as Ross had that discussion, obviously clearly he was willing to do that role many times over, but he never struck me as the person who does it out of like pure love of like tactical thinking, or, you know, like that sort of thing, which I think is, you have to have a bit of that if you want to sustain yourself as an IGL, in my opinion, because it's kind of like you'll drive yourself crazy otherwise. So to me, I always just wanted him as a star player like he is now. He just looks fucking mega. I always say this, the thing with him for me is, normally when you compliment the flaw of someone's game, what you mean is, I'm going to essentially give you a backhanded compliment. You're not going to get like praise for being like a super duper player, but I'm going to say you're not bad. He actually has both. The ceiling's really high on his game. He can fucking have crazy pop-offs. So he just, like we're talking about, he's like fucking one of the absolute best rifles. Pretty soon, when you talk about most skilled skilled riflers, and it's like donk. This guy'd be in the fucking conversation as well. He's got fucking bonkers abilities in duels. This guy'd be right up there with the Sphinxes of the world. And then also, he does have a ridiculous consistency to the floor of his game too. Like, one thing I don't get is when people essentially are telling this guy and me, we're wrong about Counter-Strike. You can't play this way. The famous line they always say is they go, he might get frags, but he doesn't play winning Counter-Strike. It's like, that's such a fucking weak imagination for how the game works, because to me, one, when you're as good as he is a master of how he plays CS. Like, he clearly knows exactly how to operate within that, because I find him to be a very consistent player. And then secondly, there is no such thing, if we're talking about someone who was really skilled and good at the game, that they just can't play CS. That means you haven't got them in the right team. Like, if you think about it, I'll give you two obvious examples, and the best thing is they were even awesome together. How about if we go back in a time machine and we pop out in like 2021 and we look at the players, Jame and Yekindar, they're so extreme and so extremely the opposite. You would think none of them could ever work. You'd think if you put Yekindar on a team, he would just chain feet. I mean, he does now. He's obviously the joke he can write in, but he didn't used to back then. He was actually really good for like 2 years. And then you would think if you put Jame in a team, he'd just save every time and then lose the game. Oh, wait, he does that as well. But you get the joke. It used to work back in the day for 2 years. So whatever happened in those 2 years, it did work. The point is, if you balance the right players around someone like this, obviously it would work. And the reason why it's always driven me crazy, I agree with you, Ross, is actually one of the least recruited for types of players, because normally it's just your star rifler anyway, and so someone's already in a team and has this role. Because I think if you look, there are 1 million young riflers who want to play aggressive roles. There aren't actually many people who are good at the blameF style. There's another thing. People don't talk about that part, Ross. Maybe I can throw that back to you briefly. As someone who's building teams, I feel like, look, if you're in certain scenes where you don't have the aggressive player, yeah, it's a nightmare. Your team's going to look shit. But I think also vice versa. I think some people who just do that thing where it's like, oh, in our team, oh, I'll be the lurker. It's like, and they're not even like suited to be a fucking lurker, mate. Some of those people just do nothing in games. Like, that's the role where you can just be invisible in the whole game. And you didn't like throw the game, but you didn't give us any impact. Like, it's actually a more subtle role what people like blameF do than people realise, right?
I think you can get away with, and there's loads of examples, you can get away with having like an average team if you have like an outrageously good, or just a player who has a good tournament in that aggressive role. You can't really have one without the other. I think in order for, and blame is, in key moments aggressive, but you can't really have one without the other. You can't have players who are like ice cold and love to play in clutch situations without having space creators, because you just don't get to play those. You just end up keep saving. So in order for Blame to succeed, you need Mattis, you need Alex, you need Freddie to run in and create space so that him and Nock can close out rounds and be really clutch in those moments. But I think you can. I think like there's loads of examples. Like if you look at like the Into the Breach team where Cypher had a really good period, or you look at Gamer Legion with Flamus, those players, multi kills, so impactful, so aggressive. Other players then can kind of meander through the game and win some clutches here and there. Those players are so important. I think the aggro riflers, and to have the absolute best ones, I think is the platform to be consistent. But you also want the people who are good in clutch situations to close out rounds. And in the example of Blame as well, like you want people who, a lot of the time the riflers that are really aggressive and young, they aren't major contributors in terms of how the game should be played. Early on, later on in their careers, we had Roy, who was amazing. He would like aggressive, would dictate exactly where we were going, what we were doing. But a lot of the time you have young guys, even Mattis now, a lot of it is still a learning process for him. And you have players like Blame and Crims and Alex who are going to help him find success and tee him up. So you need both in reality, but I think you can qualify for majors with just one. But if you're going to win big tournaments, you need to have the combination of like a really aggro rifler, space creator, multi-kill, like good chance of multi-kills, and then a player like Blame who, once he has the picture painted for him of what's happening on the map, that he'll just be better than the other player in exploiting those kind of gaps.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.